People who are interested in getting a freeze dryer see the sticker price at Home Depot or online, say no thanks and walk away. So it's a bit of a shock, because a lot of people that get into the potential for freeze drying, they're looking at it as something to save money, something to be able to have more long-term food storage and be able to do this kind of thing without having to put a bunch of money into it. But that's a massive investment up front sometimes. So we'll talk to how much it costs here in a second. Quick show of hands, does anybody in the room space already have a freeze dryer? A couple people. Okay, perfect. When I've done this presentation half dozen times now, and it seems like I almost always have about half as many people in the room who have freeze dryers that don't. It's almost even, and it really surprises me, because it's like, well, if you own a freeze dryer, why are you coming to listen to me? Well, exactly. So I was like, well, hopefully, I can at least share some knowledge of what I've learned and some of the things that I've done wrong, some of the things I've done right. Some people who have freeze dryers have set it up and barely used them. Some people who have freeze dryers have set it up and used them improperly, and they're looking for help to try and fix them. And there's some things that kind of go into that, cost-wise, logistics, where you find stuff, sourcing materials, supplies, and that kind of stuff. In that package, as they are, they will last 4 months, up to 6-ish. After that, what happens is they start to get bendy. They lose that crisp. So what you'll find is with freeze drying, sometimes the flavor will still be there, all the nutritional benefits will still be there, but you lose the mouthfeel, you lose that little bit of pop, and then it's not that good anymore. One of the things I found with freeze drying is how well things get preserved and the color difference between them. This is not the same thing, obviously. This is mint. Who knows what happens to mint when you dry it? It turns brown. I'll pass that around. That is, and when I had 2 mason jars, one that I dehydrated, I just hung the stuff. The other one I freeze dried. This was freeze dried, and I had them side by side. I've got a photo of it here that hopefully I can show you folks. The one that I hang dried got crushed on the way back, so I don't have that particular one, but side by side the difference is about from this color to that color, and you wouldn't really think much about what kind of a difference that would make, but when it comes to food and stuff that you're eating, especially if you're feeding children or if you're reconstituting something, if you reconstitute something that looks like this, that has the same nutritional value as something like that, and you do that one side by side, guess which one's going to get eaten? And it makes a difference sometimes to how well those kinds of things play into your food storage, your long-term food preparation, that kind of stuff. These are plums. You're welcome to open that up and have one. If you want, passing those around. Those were processed probably in 2020. They're very sweet. They're like candy. And what you'll find with freeze drying is that because of the process, and hopefully I can get into that here in a minute, because of the way the process works, they hold their shape and all the water is removed. So the structure of that fruit is retained. The color, all those properties remain the same. When you have things like a dried plum, which is like eating a giant raisin, those properties are a little different. The mouthfeel is different, the sweetness is different, and you kind of have a different experience when you eat it. So I like to be able to harvest stuff like fruit and vegetables and things like that, and take advantage of how I can leverage those sources, and buying food when it's cheap, stockpiling it, and then freeze drying it so that I can retain it for longer life. That jar hasn't been open for probably 3 or 4 years, and those are some of the first ones that I did. They're very tart, you can taste them, it actually tastes good. I wouldn't think that a plum would taste good, but it does, and they're very sweet, which, if you eat them off of the tree, you have a lot of water retained, and that waters down the flavor. When you remove that water, all that flavor winds up being exponentially more when you eat it raw. So if you eat a raw apple, or if you eat a raw plum, or if you eat a raw banana, pineapple as well, some of those kind of things. They have so much more flavor to them that it's astonishing. This is also a plum. This is 4 of those. What happened was I needed 12 mason jars in a hurry, so I crushed them. What you have is plum powder. You can make banana powder, you can make mint powder, you can make mushroom powder, you can make all kinds of powders. And people that get into freeze drying, or who kind of match up the advertising with what they think they need, they don't realize the power of having something in a powdered form. If you go camping, say again? Baby food. Awesome for baby food, because you can make plum sauce, right? And you can take that stuff on the road with you if you need to, throw it in with your pancake mix. Then you have a sweetness to that pancake. One of the things that I do, and those plums, you know, and the apples too, they'll crush in your hands. They'll pulverize super easily. So packaging is kind of an important thing to keep in mind, because if you want them to remain intact, you got to make sure that they're stable on the outside. If packaging doesn't matter, then you can crush them up as much as you want. One of the things that I like to do is harvest stuff for free, because I don't like paying money for stuff. I'm cheap. So what I will do is go on a kayak adventure across the river where no one else can reach the blackberries that I like, and I load up, and then I bring those back, and then I freeze them, and then throw them in my freeze dryer. Blackberries, raspberries, that kind of stuff are awesome for pancakes. Because what happens when you put fresh blackberries in a pancake? It turns to snot. And you're eating, you know, what's just, look, it tastes okay, but you've got that weird mouthfeel. I was going to say blackberries, raspberries, that kind of stuff. If you put the freeze-dried fruit into something that you're going to cook, like pancakes or something like that, it will absorb the moisture out of it and reconstitute. So it will be like eating a banana inside your pancake, or a blackberry, or whatever. It's almost like if it was inserted in there. So there's a lot to that. Freeze drying has been around for a long time, and one of the things that I mentioned before on one of my previous presentations was how Cheetos came about. Anybody familiar with that story? No? Okay, so basically after World War II, there was a guy who was pretty savvy with his cash, and he came up on a military surplus auction, and they had, like, I don't know, 100 pallets of freeze-dried cheese. And what he did was he was like, well, I could probably figure out something to do with this. So he bought it and wound up extruding just basically a corn type thing. Like, I don't know how they make it. They dip corn meal inside of a oil bath or whatever, make the Cheetos. And he had them, but they were raw. Nobody liked them. But then once he put cheese on them, everybody loved them. And then all of a sudden you got Cheetos taken off, because one guy was savvy with how he handled his sourcing for stuff. Now, he didn't have a freeze dryer, but he had the media. He had something to it. If you were to take that plum powder and maybe roll a chocolate something in it, if you're making some sort of a cordial or drink or something like that, a little bit of raspberry sugar powder on the top, you know, that kind of stuff. When you get creative with what you can do with the powders and the food, it really starts to become pretty powerful. So what is freeze drying? Anybody here not know what freeze drying is? Okay, that's helpful. So I'm talking to you guys. Everybody else already knows. Freeze drying is different than dehydrating. Everybody knows what dehydrating is. You can hang something up and let it dry out. You can put it in an Excalibur. You can put it in a Ronco food dehydrator. And after a while, you get a piece of leather or something that's going to somewhat resemble the food that you put in there. Usually it will brown as a result of oxidation. That is because what happens is, over time with certain plants, as they oxidize, they discolor. Sometimes that is off-putting for people, and it doesn't taste very good, especially little people. They don't like that discoloration. They don't like eating stuff that's brown or weird looking. If it looks like it came off of the plant, you got a gold one. I have a hard time holding on to my freeze-dried raspberries. They go quick as soon as the kids find them. So what is freeze drying? So freeze drying is different than dehydrating. Dehydrating basically allows the fruit to naturally lose a certain amount of moisture over time. Usually there's still a small amount of moisture that's retained in that fruit itself, which gives it a little bit of that leathery, pliable feel. Freeze drying, did I say freeze drying? I did say freeze drying. Food dehydrating will leave some moisture in the whatever it is you're doing. Freeze drying leaves zero. There's no moisture left inside that particular thing, whatever you're freeze drying. There was a story of a guy who had a family heirloom Bible. Oops, sorry. He had a family heirloom Bible, and it was damaged by a flood in their house. And it was one of those ones where it had gone from generation to generation, and they had scribbles in the sides, names, dates from great grandma Bell or whoever was writing in the Bible at the time. And just like any, water, any sort of book, if you get water in it, sometimes when you try to peel the pages apart, what happens? They rip, separate. So what they did is they actually put it in a freeze dryer. They put that Bible in the freeze dryer, extracted all the moisture, and it was like the day before the flood. So freeze drying is a form of food preservation that can last sometimes 25 to 30 years. I've been more than comfortable eating stuff that I've put up 5 years ago when I first got my machine, the first batch of stuff that I put in it. And I test it every so often just to make sure that it is holding. This is one of the first batches that I had, and it was just one that I grabbed out of my pantry before we came down here for the show. When it comes to freeze drying, I mentioned that it removes all the water and then it leaves the structure. What it does, or how that works, is what's called sublimation. So when you have something that goes from a solid to a vapor and skips the liquid phase, that's called sublimation. So when you have something that's frozen, like ice, and then you go straight past the liquid phase to a vapor phase, what happens is the structure of that thing holds. Like, it doesn't flatten, it doesn't, deteriorate or anything. It just holds, kind of like a honeycomb, like a hollow honeycomb. And all the color remains the same, and it's exactly as the day you sliced it when you put it in the freeze dryer. Some of the good things, dehydrating is awesome because it's free. I can hang something right there and dehydrate something, right? And I'll get a little bit of time out of it, and maybe I could throw it in a meal bar or something like that. Freeze drying can last a lot longer. Cost is a big variable with freeze dryers that tends to turn people away. There are a couple of ways that you can get one cheap or free sometimes, and we can get to that in just a second if this works. But the cost part is a little bit tricky on those. The benefits to those, though, is that lifespan, because if you can actually extend the life of that food longer, then I can trust that I can go 5 years from now with something that I harvest and process today, which for me is value. That's where that sticker price starts to not be so shocking. As part of the freezing process, what the machine does is it drops to 40 below, and then it gradually raises that temperature 100 to 175 degrees. And what that does is it takes something that is either at room temperature or frozen to even farther below, and what that does, it makes it to where it doesn't thaw as quickly. So you can extract all the moisture through a vapor form by heating up that space under a vacuum. Whenever you apply vacuum to something, if you're trying to make it cold, it will make it colder than you could without. The opposite is true with heat. If you're ever trying to increase the heat with something, if you put it under a vacuum, you will get it hotter than you normally could with just normal means. So what this does is it allows you to harness that particular form of science. And really, there was no science to this in the beginning. They just had people that were in the Andes Mountains, and they would go up and put fresh fruit and vegetables up there and then drop them off, and it would get to 30, 40 below at night, and then they'd go back up the next day and bring it down. In that process of bringing it back down, it would naturally freeze dry, because what was happening is it was thawing out faster than it could go to a vapor or to a liquid. So then they would have this naturally freeze-dried product. We don't have those kind of mountains here, and nobody wants to do that. So we add electricity and we make it work. If you take, and has anybody ever harvested berries before? What happens when you put those berries in a gallon bag and stick them in the freezer? You get a block of berries. So tip for you, baking sheet. Put your berries on a baking sheet. If you have enough room, put a little stand on them, like a little 1/2 or 1-inch piece of PVC or something, so that you can set another one on. And then you can elevate your berries in a freezer, especially if you have a stand-up freezer or something like that, and then you have trays full of that fruit. At that point, you can pick them right off the trays. I wish I had this thing up because I have a picture of that. When they're frozen, it's easier and a little bit faster for the machine to go into that mode automatically, because it doesn't have to drop down 30 degrees before it can get down to -40. Or, you know, it doesn't have to go from room temperature, whatever it is, 60 degrees down to 30, down to -40. If it's already, you know, 32 degrees or right at 0, something like that, then you're okay. It just takes less work for the machine to do the job. Some of the parts and pieces, there are a couple main components with this machine. There is a vacuum pump that's designed to provide vacuum to the actual chamber itself. There is a cylinder that is the chamber, which is usually a long tube. Sometimes they're oriented vertically in the scientific models, but the majority of the residential and the large scale ones are cylindrical. I've seen a freeze dryer the size of this room before. They're pretty impressive. But when I saw it, I realized that it had the same parts and pieces as the one of mine. There's also a tube that leads from the cylinder, the chamber, to the vacuum pump that basically draws the vacuum from that cylinder, a simple door closure, and a rubber ring. Sometimes there's some other electronics that are involved in that as well, and those help to control the time and temperature and how long to set up your batches and stuff like that. That's one of the things that's convenient about the Harvest Right ones, is you can adjust those things, and it's fairly simple for the average user to be able to do. But the time it takes to do some of these batches is going to vary based on the current humidity, temperature outside, temperature inside the room that you're dealing with, you know, the density of the food, how thick you make your cuts. You'll notice that all those apple slices were very uniform. If you have uniform slices, they will dry uniformly. If you have slices that are kind of, you know, different thicknesses, you have to freeze dry it to the until the thickest one is complete, until it's all the way done. Sometimes that means you're excited when you open that door to start putting your stuff in jars, and then you realize that, oh, those ones in the middle are done. I got 2 more hours to go. So you gotta gauge that. And I can tell you, those apples, I had a small business that I tried selling those apples, and it was I was able to run the machine 24/7 for 30 days, and the most I could get out of it was 5 batches per week, because it runs on roughly a 32 to 36 hour cycle. How many of us are on a 32 to 36 hour cycle? Yeah, he is. He's different. He's an oddball. So it was really difficult for me to manage that, because I would be going in late at night to start a batch, and then I would be up super early to finish the batch and then get it ready to start the next one. Sometimes I was leaving work to go back home, start the next one to get it going, but I was able to do a lot of production with it. If you have the ability and the means to do that, you can generate gallons and hundreds of gallons of food per year and put it up, as long as you have a good place to put it and some sort of a decent container. The last most important piece of the freeze dryer is the food. One of the reasons why I prefer to stick with fresh fruits and vegetables that I have at least some control over is that I know what's in them. Have any of you ever tasted the difference between a Haagen-Dazs and a Blue Bunny ice cream bar? No? Totally different. That flavor is going to be exponentially different once you put it in a freeze dryer. Now, if you go to the store and get an $8 ice cream bar from freeze-dried ice cream bar from Mountain House or whatever the freeze-dried ones, you'll probably find that it's okay, it's palatable. But if you do a couple of them side by side, you will realize that there's a chemical difference between types of foods. And that is because these food manufacturers pay a lot of money to do food research and find chemicals that taste a certain way, or that make you want to eat more, or that have more salt or less sugar. And what happens is, instead of tasting that ice cream bar that you enjoy normally, you remove the water and you taste every chemical that's in there. And it's disgusting. I no longer freeze dry ice cream. I freeze dry fruits and vegetables. Meat. Anybody here eat like packaged meat, your sliced meat, butt egg ham? All through college, that's how I survived. Butt egg ham and rice and 48 packs of eggs that I had to get, you know, trying to eat through it. But, you know, a lot of people have been through that, but I actually tried that and I cannot stand it. I can eat it raw, but once you start removing all of that watered down that's in that food product, all you taste are chemicals and preservatives. It's absolutely disgusting. Now, the food that I get, I do everything I can to get it for free. Why? Because that machine's expensive. It's fresh. So what I don't hunt myself, either if I'm hunting on a kayak, or if I'm hunting in the woods, or if I know a hunter who has a little bit of extra elk in the freezer, you know, those are the kinds of things that I chase down. How many of you have orchards at home? Okay. How many varieties of fruits and vegetables, fruits do you have on your orchards? 4 varieties, okay. Apples, cherries?
Apples, pears, peaches, and plums.
Okay, awesome. So, for those of you who didn't raise your hand, how many of you have friends, families, or neighbors who have those trees? Guess what? The majority of people that have those trees don't harvest them. They can't stand them. They want them gone. They want the pits gone. Nobody harvests their own fruit trees anymore. Berry bushes are a little different, but for the most part, fruit trees all day long. So what I tend to do is hit up friends and family and see what I can do to go knock on doors when those plums are getting just about right to fall off the tree. Set a tarp, get a couple 50-gallon bags full of them, and then go home and process them. How much did that cost me? Time and fuel. Yeah.
I think it's called Abandoned Orchard. I don't know if it still exists, but there's abandonedorchard.com.
Okay.
And you can go on and old orchards that used to produce.
Yep.
Like we moved to Olympia and there's an old 20-acre blueberry farm. It's
Oh,
all
wow.
overgrown, and no one picks it. So me and my kids go there every
That's awesome.
year. But blueberries take a long time to freeze dry.
They do. And there are some things that will take longer than others to freeze dry. Buddy of mine, overgrown with raspberries. So I offered to freeze dry some of them for him because I gave some of my raspberries to him and said, hey, give these to your kids, see if they like them. Gobbled them up. So I was like, how about you give me some of your raspberries, your frozen raspberries, and then I'll freeze dry them for him. Guess what my cut was? 50%. Anytime I freeze dry something for someone else, my cut is 50%. So let's say you've already harvested your blueberries. If you want, I mean, you already got a freeze dryer, so it doesn't matter. But let's say you were out there harvesting blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, plums, you know, meat. You know, if you got an animal and you're trying to figure out how to parse out frozen food for that kind of stuff. Yeah, 50%. That helps me add value to this machine because all I am doing is making sure that that machine is still running. Because if it's not running, what good's it doing? It's a giant paperweight. And then I actually get a little bit out of it. One of the neat things about this is you can actually use the freeze dryer as a tool, as a survival tool, more than just for what it physically does, but for what it provides to you. Anybody here in HVAC mechanic? Okay. Refrigerant technologist. For anybody who works with refrigerators? Okay. Any welders? Okay. Yeah. Anybody that works with oil, vacuum, anything like that? Okay. That's your best friend. Okay. So you are in a unique position where you can actually fix that machine if it goes down.
Fix mine.
And I've fixed mine to a certain extent, but I'm not an HVAC technician. I could probably replace the radiator components. I could probably replace a couple of other things here and there, but welding stainless, not my deal. I would need to rely on someone to be able to do that for me in a pinch. Maybe someone who's capable of handling electronics, you know, who can diagnose a problem with a motherboard or something like that. Those people are extremely valuable to have in your back pocket. Guess how you can make some instant friends? Give them some freeze-dried stuff. That is one thing that people don't really take into consideration when they get a freeze dryer. a lot of times people will go to the Home Depot or Ace Hardware or whatever and see this freeze dryer and say, oh, that's kind of a neat little thing. Let's go ahead and grab that while we're getting our refrigerator and our this and our that and our other thing for our new house. And then they use it once or twice, and then what? They realize that it takes work. How many of you like sitting in the kitchen and processing cherries? Not a lot of fun. Sorry. It's not a ton of fun, but it can be very rewarding if you have something to do with it. But most people, if you're buying a $2,500 machine, you just want it to do the work for you and walk away. There's a lot of work that goes into it in the food processing side that you need to be aware of, some time involvement and stuff like that. But there's a lot of value on the back end, because if you can do something with that, and I've got all the plums and apples and cherries and all that kind of stuff that I can handle. But someone who doesn't, maybe who has a little kid in a bad environment or something like that, or if you need to try and, like the guy that I did that with at work, he was an auto mechanic. Now, I can't use him to fix my machine, but guess what I can use him for? Hey, I've got a couple gallons of freeze-dried raspberries or blackberries, whatever, any kind of anything. I know he's got 2 little baby girls, and I need help with this particular project with my car. Can we work something out? Guess what? People will find a way. We're living in a society right now where cash is kind of on the downhill slope, and having something like this as a tool, if you use it as a tool, can be that way. Sometimes that sticker price is a little bit much. If you have a group or a unit, a church, one gal approached me at Prepper Camp in Saluda, North Carolina last year, because she worked with basically a food bank, and the food bank received so much that they couldn't get rid of it, especially the fresh fruits and vegetables. So what they wanted to do was incorporate that within their food preservation, so that in the off season, when they don't have all those vegetables and fruits coming in, they can actually extend the life of them and give them out to folks. My favorite people are new gardeners. Why?
They grow everything.
They grow everything, and then they don't know what to do with it. Love the guy who plants 4 zucchini plants. Right? What happens when you get someone who's got 4 zucchini plants? You get a lot of free zucchini. Shows up at the office, in the bowls, shows up in the back of your truck sometimes.
Had a lady say that somebody would bring zucchini to church and put it in people's cars.
Oh yeah.
So she eventually wouldn't leave her windows open because
Yeah.
she didn't want the
You don't
zucchini.
want any zucchini anymore.
Just the size you want.
So I want to talk a little bit about expenses. Aside from the sticker price, you need to consider what you're doing with this equipment. It is basically a mini fridge on steroids. So it's about like this, maybe 2 feet deep, 3 feet deep, something like that. And everything is basically in a cylinder about that big. Mine has 4 trays, some of them have 5, some of them are a little bit bigger. But for the most part, that's what you're going to get. So you have a tray that is about 1 inch by maybe 8 inches by maybe 20 inches deep. So that's what you need to be able, that is your footprint to be able to do stuff with. If it takes me 36 hours to run 1 batch through those, and I get 2 gallons of food out of it, then I need to realize what I'm doing with my power. If I'm running a mini fridge for that amount of time. Prone to wildfires where I am. That's really tough when you're in the middle of the batch and you get a knock at the door, right? Down south, hurricanes. They have a problem with it every year. Apparently there's hurricane seasons that come around and people aren't ready for them. Well, if you know that you have some kind of storm brewing, are you going to start that process? No. You have to be aware of those kind of things because that process needs to finish. And if you have 36 hours, you got to make sure that you're not out at the Thrivalist Fair or, or going to go camping or, going somewhere for the holidays. Shut it down. What I will usually do is unplug it from the wall if I'm not using it. The machines are, mine when I was running it 100% for 30 days, kicked up my power bill by about $100 a month. So it's significant. And it's basically, because it's like a deep freezer and an oven that runs consistently. So you have to keep in mind that if you were gonna turn your oven on at 200 degrees and walk away for a day and a half, your power bill is probably gonna go up a little bit, Okay, if you do that for a long period of time or over and over again, you're going to have some problems. Space considerations. I mentioned the size. You also need to make sure that you have oriented that machine in an area that can handle some heat. Because what happens when you are using a lot of electricity to freeze or heat something? You are generating ambient heat. Part of that process requires a lot of movement of heat, cold, stuff like that. So you need to make sure that you have room for that machine in an environment where it's actually conducive to that kind of equipment. First mistake I made, I was like, yes, my freeze dryer arrived. I'm gonna put it in my pantry. Bad idea. Why is that a bad idea? It heats up all of your food stores. And it's noisy. Mine's a little different because my pantry's kind of offset, but it doesn't matter. I mean, you gotta be mindful of where you put your freeze dryer because it will generate heat in that space, and you don't want it in any place that you want it to have a cooler climate control. Anybody familiar with Rick and Jane? No? Okay. They called me soon after they got theirs, and they were like, you know, we're getting our first freeze dryer. What do we need to know? And I kind of talked through them. Well, I forgot to tell them about the heat. They took it down and put it in our basement, which would be fine if you normally want to keep a basement warmer, but they didn't because that's where they kept what? All their cool stuff. So they eventually had to pack it upstairs and put it somewhere else. So orientation of that machine is very important. You got to keep that in mind.
220 or 110?
110. They do make 220 versions that are much larger, like industrial size. And I was looking into some of those when I was doing my food stuff, but they're upwards of $10,000-$20,000, and you're talking a lot of. You would have to have 3 or 4 people just processing stuff for one batch to do something like that, or some kind of a automated system.
The new extra large is plenty big.
It's pretty decent. I haven't seen that. I guess Harvest Right has a new one now. Mine is a medium, so it's kind of in the middle, and that's more than enough for what I need. For the amount of time and energy that I'm willing to put into that thing and what I get out of it, it's
bigger is not better.
That's correct, because you're also going to be drawing more power. You're going to be taking up more space, so kind of keep that in mind.
Can you over-process?
I haven't. But I don't really, I mean...
Like if you said if one was thicker, and if some are really thin, does it wind up being an issue by running them longer for the thin ones?
Not necessarily, but sometimes if you go beyond a certain point, the machine cannot do anymore. So if you've got stuff that's got way too much moisture in it, then you're going to struggle to be able to get anything. Because what happens is, during the process of that sublimation, all of that water clings to the inside of this stainless steel cylinder. So at a certain point, you're going to run out of surface area on that cylinder, and you will have nowhere else for that ice to build up. And you'll have some challenges in that regard.
I've noticed that when I had in the beginning stages, when I did things that were not uniform, the accumulation of the ice on the outside of the drum would actually, at that point you're drying as well and heating up. The accumulation of that ice is actually hurting it because you have a heater going and then you're getting too much ice buildup, and it's adding moisture back into the area because it's too much ice, and you'll have items that will sometimes start to get cold again.
Yes.
And a really long run cycle.
Failed batches are the worst feeling in the world. Absolute worst, because you put time and energy into it. You're waiting for this thing to get done right, and you know you're just, if this is something where it's like I have like those apples that had to be done because I didn't have any extras to hand out. So in order for me to get at least this many for today and yesterday, I knew I had to get a batch done, and it had to be perfect. Well, I had already done, I don't know, 100 batches of these same things, so I knew what it was going to take. I knew how long it was going to be, and all that kind of stuff. So having some of that cardinal knowledge and using that machine frequently will help you identify when is okay to have, you know, different types of things in there and for how long.
Like, don't open your valve when you have a bucket full of
Nope.
water.
Done that before.
Yeah, that was my first time.
Yep. So, yeah, I probably don't want to get to that too much. We talked about cycle duration. I'm up against the clock here. Hopefully I can actually get through this stuff. Mechanical troubleshooting. This is a challenge for a lot of folks. I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that you have someone on hand who can at least help you. A lot of the stuff you can do yourself. I have fixed mine myself. I've replaced modules, I've replaced cords, I've replaced all kinds of stuff on the inside of it. I have not welded it back together. Luckily, I haven't been that brutal to it. But there are some things where it's like, I know where my limitations stop, and I have got to probably look into having someone else seriously consider repairing this for me. But it's very important to make sure that you keep extra parts on hand. If you decide to get one of these machines, and I can tell you from personal experience, it will take weeks to get new parts sometimes. And that can be detrimental. If you want to try and process something for a big event, or have enough stuff on hand for a particular thing for whatever reason and something fails, or like what happened in my case, I had 3 boxes of apple boxes that I was processing, and my machine went down. That's a lot of money sitting, and those apples are going to go bad quick. So I'm on the phone with Harvest Right trying to get parts and pieces, and they're like, oh yeah, let's see what's going on. I was like, no, I need this, and I need it as fast as you can get it to me. I'll pay you whatever, just get it to me. That was something that I learned right away, that if I have a problem, it's going to take me some time to get it repaired. Or at least, if I have the parts, it might take me some time to get it fixed. But if I don't have those parts, I'm going to be reaching out like crazy to try and find them. So if you know other people with freeze dryers in your community, sometimes that is useful. Luckily, they build in, on one of them, a spare module. So you'll have, I think, 3 or 4 on one part that control the heat, dry, cooling fan, all that kind of stuff. The relays. If one of them fails, you do have a backup. And that is basically designed so that you can, it's kind of like a fuse in your car. The extra one, that little slot where you have extra one. So there is a very small amount of backup that you can rely on, but not much. So pumps, you want to make sure if you have access to a secondary pump, it is useful in case yours fails. Pump filters are nice to have. Oil is a big one. You have to have food grade vacuum pump oil. Do not use hydraulic oil. Do not use motor oil. Do not use baby oil. You're going to use vacuum pump oil. One of the things that I found is that a quart of that is about $15, something like that, from Harvest Right. And I'll go through maybe half of that to one of them every time I change out those cycles for oil. But you can get a gallon of vacuum pump oil that's used for milking cows for maybe $20. Like at Farm and Home stores, Ace has it. There's a couple places that carry it, but it's a useful alternative, and I prefer that oil to the Harvest Right oil just as a preference, because I can see the oil level a little bit better. And yeah.
How frequently do you change that out?
I will tell you, they recommend that you can filter it, and they sent me a filter that was a piece of garbage. And so I tried to modify it, I tried to make it better, none of it worked. So no, not every cycle. I will typically change out the oil whenever I notice that the batches are taking a little bit longer to complete, or if I taste contamination. So yeah, because what can sometimes happen is if you've got a problem with the filter, you'll actually get that oil contaminant inside the chamber. And just like any of the other stuff, the processed foods and stuff, the chemicals that are in there, you taste that. So the oil, you also can taste that. One of the food grade oil things is that, yeah, you can taste it, but it ain't gonna kill you. Like, or it's not gonna make you really sick. You'll taste that it'll be a little bit off. It won't taste like that. It'll taste a little different. So it is nice to be able to have extra oil on hand for that reason. Adequate food storage methods. Guess what happens when you don't package your freeze-dried food properly? It reconstitutes. Guess how I know that those apples will last about 6 months in that packaging? Yeah, that was a hard lesson to learn. It's fine in the glass. It probably would have been okay if I sealed it up in Mylar, maybe throw some oxygen absorbers in, but just in those little packages, it's not enough. So if you invest a lot of time and energy and money into the food that you're putting into this product, make damn sure that you have good storage for that food when it's done.
So your best storage is glass.
I prefer glass over anything.
Okay.
Mason jars are the best.
And it can go over 6 months.
Oh yeah, that's probably 5 years old. If you have a batch, you'll get 3 or 4 jars, probably 2 or 3 mason jars per tray with 4 trays. So do the math. It's about 8 to 12 mason jars per batch.
What about vacuum sealed bags?
They better be good bags.
Like seal a meal bag? Can you use the freezing meat or?
I don't know about that. You can try it, but I've never done that. And I don't know that I'd recommend that because plastic does have some permeation. And moisture is really the big thing. If you get moisture in it, and this is where I'm getting at with those mason jars, you can let those mason jars set for a week and then crack the lids, take one off the top. If it is crispy, like when you put it in there, you're good to go. And I know this because I made a couple of batches, and when you have some things that are slightly thicker or thinner than others, the way to test the scientific method for finding out if your food has been processed properly is to break it. Snap it, make sure that it breaks and is crisp like those apples. Well, that might happen on the 2 or 3 that you pick, but if you missed one and you can't tell that maybe the layers weren't right, or maybe it was sitting on top of something else, there was a little bit of moisture in between, and you put that in a container, it will contaminate the entire container. So with the mason jars, if I have 8 to 12 mason jars and one of them fails, that's better than putting all of it in one large container and having all of it fail and not finding out for 5 years. Okay. There's one thing that I wanted to mention before I go is your end of the world scenario. Okay. Everything is down. You cannot call Harvest Right for parts. You cannot get oil. You cannot find, whatever, power's down, but you just happen to have solar or generator or whatever. You can make this thing run physically. Where do you go when something fails? A couple of options. I'm gonna leave it up to your imagination on how you obtain these things, but I will tell you that freeze drying is used a lot in the HVAC industry. Not just freeze drying. Vacuum pumps are used a lot in the HVAC industry. Okay. It's also used a lot in the scientific world. So universities, laboratories, any kind of medical storage facilities. Some pharmacies might have one. There are other places where you can actually obtain the materials. In a grid up, happy-go-lucky, let's make hay kind of scenario, you can actually approach these folks at their auction sites and get spare parts, spare pieces. Sometimes you can actually buy entire machines. The folks who go to Home Depot and then they buy one and use it once and realize it's too much work, guess where they put their freeze dryers? Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. They sell them for a song. Just get it out, right? So there are options for that kind of stuff, but keep in mind that if things are really bad, you might need to consider where you're possibly going to get that kind of stuff, because you can actually get the oils, you can get the pumps, you can get the lines, you can get all kinds of stuff, even sometimes the parts and pieces for your specific unit, if you know where they are.
To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.